So next up, we've got Ian McLaren-Wallace, Director of Psychology at Lithia Group. And his talk is a continual process of becoming. In this talk, Ian talks to us about how a better understanding of human psychology can help us develop better products and service. Ian, do you want to give your screen share a whirl? You're currently on mute. There we go. Perfect.
Yeah, just unmute it and just share my screen. So can everyone see a picture of a brain?
That's good. Yeah, you're sounding good and the screen share is good. Over to you, Ian.
What I'm going to talk about in the next 15 to 20 minutes, unless I get completely carried away, in which case Alex will rein me back in with his shepherd's crook, is just a different way of looking at human behaviour and human psychology. And I'd really like to thank Tim from the bottom of my heart about that fantastic talk and the experience he shared. And I'll be sharing some perspectives on what he's done is a really, really human way. It's a really natural and organic way to engage with uncertainty, tension, and challenge. I've worked as a psychologist in many different industry domains and sectors. I was voted the most innovative organisational psychologist in the UK, he said modestly. So I'm just going to chat about a different approach that I've been taking and with some colleagues like Scott Saveright have been taking to understanding human behaviour individually and collectively. In all these different industries that I've worked in and domains, there's always a realisation, usually later rather than sooner, unfortunately, that in any human endeavour, there's that realisation that understanding human psychology is really, really important. And the challenge we have with that is most popular psychology is junk psychology. So all these lists, hacks, weird tricks, things like Myers-Briggs, in fact, all of psychometrics, triune brain, left brain, right brain, Maslow's pyramid, all that stuff is just junk and nonsense. And all these lists that do things like, here are 7 things to do before 5:30 a.m. in the morning if you want to be successful, they're just nonsense because that's not how the human brain works. My personal opinion on this, I blame airport bookshops, which thankfully aren't so busy just now, but they are full of books by guys like Malcolm Gladwell who are writing stuff that's unsubstantiated, it's very populist, it's very attention grabbing. But in my opinion, these airport bookshops are the modern Plato's cave. That people are getting a kind of a glimpse of what's going on, but it's really distorted and not really that useful. They sell the idea of the brain as a machine, something that is deterministic, it's linear, it works in that Aristotelian logic. It's all full of cogs and gears. And the challenge with that is, this is an evolution of Conway's law from '67 from Melvin Conway. If you think of your brain as being mechanistic and linear and deterministic, that's kind of what you'll do at work. That's how you will view the workplace. This has continued, unfortunately, into the idea of the brain as a computer, that all you need to do to perform better is somehow update your software or clear your cache or add more RAM, and all that nonsense from things like NLP, that's neuro-linguistic programming, and not natural language processing, which is actually lovely, but neuro-linguistic processing, all that stuff from Bandler and Grinder doesn't really work, and it usually ends in tears. So how can we get out of this modern Plato's cave and achieve a better understanding? What's a better sort of understanding? So for a long time now, over 100 years, but more intensively in the last 10 to 15 years, people have realized that the brain's not a machine. Your brain is a living organism. It's a process rather than a thing. Your brain simulates the world. So that's what your brain does. This is why humans are so successful. We create simulations of the world in our brains. So we use our 100 billion neurons and our quadrillions of connections to create a simulation of the world. And it's not a matrix style simulation. We're actually modeling the world so we can make sense of it and engage with uncertainty. So your brain is an organic, non-linear simulator. It's not a mechanistic linear predictor. This is Frank Rosenblatt in the 1960s trying to make one. This is the first piece of AI, the perceptron. didn't work that well. So your brain is a simulator rather than a predictor. And the simulations that we run, the non-psychological term for them is stories. We are continually running stories. Everyone on this call just now is running these stories, mainly unconsciously. And that's the challenge with engaging with these simulations, with these stories. That as George Lakoff, Stanislas Dehaene, Benjamin Libet demonstrated, 98% of our stories run unconsciously. Most psychology attempts to engage with that 2% of our conscious awareness, but there are other ways to engage with the unconscious parts of it. So the thing that I originated, one of the things that I have made just through working with clients, working with organizations and individuals, is a conceptual edge, and it's called the human edge. And it's really accessible, really immediate, and here's a little diagram of it. So if this was to scale, this line would be right up at the top of the screen, 2% on top, 98% below. But to make it easy to work with, the lines across the middle. So there's an edge between, excuse me, our conscious awareness and unconscious awareness. There's also another edge involved because we are simulating the outer world from our inner world. So we have an inside and an outside. And you may think, oh my goodness, not another 2x2 matrix. That's done to make it a bit familiar, but also this is really dynamic, as I'll start to demonstrate here. So the process of consciousness and unconsciousness is generative rather than prescriptive. So what that means, that the classical psychological view from things like John Boyd's OODA loop is we observe the outside world and then make judgments on it, make decisions and act. Or from Chris Argyris with his ladder of inference, we're observing something and then going up a ladder of understanding around it. That's not how it works. Your brain is continually and consciously generating imagery. So visual, audio, haptic, olfactory, doing this all the time. So just to sketch that out, it kind of looks like this. We have this imagining loop. And this imagining, 98% of it is happening unconsciously. And we are generating this and feeding it forward and validating it with our senses in the outer world. So as far back as 1911, the Scottish neuroscientist Thomas Graham Brown stated that the function of the senses is to modulate internally generated imagery. And latterly, guys like Anil Seth have been confirming this. So this is how your perception works. It starts from the inside, you feed forward and you validate it. And it's non-periodic, it's largely deterministic, it's non-linear, but it is a flow. And it forms what Edward Lorenz described in 1963 in his famous paper that I'm sure you're all familiar with, Deterministic Non-Periodic Flow. It forms a dynamically stable system, a Lorenz attractor. And then what happens when we do this, we validate in the outer world, we feed it back into our imagination. But because we have that conscious awareness, we also abstract generalities from the validation. So theories, ideas, concepts, thoughts. So we start to symbolize those. We symbolize those in our inside. We're making theories and ideas and concepts about what we have sensed in the outside world. And because we're all running simulations, you're probably thinking, there's an empty space there. There must be another perceptual loop there. And you're absolutely right. What happens is we then take what we have symbolized, our thoughts and ideas, our concepts, and we feed them back forward, mainly unconsciously, into the outside world in a process of dissemination. So we disseminate aspects of our identity, of our needs, of our beliefs into other people, places, events, and objects. Now, I'm just whizzing through this because I don't want to go into a huge psychological lecture, but just trying to give you some feeling, some glimpses, some sense of how human perception and human psychology really works. And those four perceptual loops are folded together plectically to form this plectic Lorenz attractor. We can also use these loops in other ways. We can use them in this really immediate way, that we can understand them as being emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual. So when we imagine something or when we emote, these two are really closely linked. So if you're a bit angry with me, you're unlikely to say, Ian, I'm angry with you, because I just think you're just a bit disappointed. But if you say, I'm absolutely fuming at you, Ian, so it sounds like you're on fire with anger, or if you do that again, I will positively erupt. It sounds like you're a volcano. Or if you're frustrated with me and say, working with you is like banging my head off a brick wall. We use linguistic and physical imagery all the time to express our emotions. We validate those with physical things, what we can sense, what we can see, what we can feel, what we can hear. And we also, when we abstract those, they become mental things, theories, ideas, and thoughts. And when we push them back out unconsciously, they become things that we explore in that spirited way, things that raise our spirits, lower our spirits. And it's not spiritual in the sense of any religion or theosophy. It's just something exploring the unknown. And we can map that again to something even more immediate: hearts, hands, heads, and horizons. So we feel with our hearts, we sense with our hands, we think with our heads, and we explore with the horizons. And then that, just even working with these individual loops, sometimes you're trying to work out something that's to do with your heart, as Tim was talking about in his amazing talk, and you're trying to use your head to do it, and it doesn't really work. And you have to get into your heart, into your emotions, understanding what you're imagining, what's going on there, to actually do something with it. It can also happen when we try and work too logically with something, when we're just using a couple of the loops there, when we're just looking at things that are really conscious, so theories and senses. And until quite recently, until the 19th century, the word psychology meant the engagement with the soul and spirit. That's the original Greek meaning of psyche, is soul and spirit. And it wasn't until the late 19th century that psyche actually came to mean mind. So anything psychological, if you ignore the soul and the spirit in it and try and just solve it logically, it doesn't usually work out that well. We can also go the other way. We can have what Tim's been describing here as that Ulysses contract, what's happening emotionally and spiritually below the surface. We can do that, but as Tim showed, we really need to look at the data, look at the facts above that. And very often people get caught in those myths, as we've found out with things that I'm not going to mention, but are happening all the time around us, that people get deluded by these myths because they don't actually engage with critical thinking and what's actually happening. We can also see it here when people idealize things, that they don't actually validate them in the outside world or understand the stories that are being told around them. And this is one of the big challenges with airport bookshops, are all these lists, is that they're all idealized, that they say things, this is what you should do, this is what you could do, this is what you would do. And in that ideal world, all these books work. But in reality, a lot of them, you engage with tension, or you engage with really complex, ambiguous, paradoxical situations. So how can we avoid the tears? So just very, very briefly, I'm going to describe ways of working with these edges, and particularly navigating the edges. One of the ways that Scott Seabright and I have been doing this is understanding psychological safety, understanding where you feel safe within a loop or safe within an area, and why you feel unsafe crossing an edge, crossing a boundary. Like Tim's been talking about, he was feeling unsafe about sharing these really personal feelings, and absolutely brilliant talk, but that feeling of you've got to cross a boundary, you've got to cross an edge. So a lot about working with your perceptions is navigating those edges, and that can be a really scary thing. So this is what Tim was talking about. I wish I'd said I just made this slide up, but this is such universal human behavior. I did this slide a few days ago. So you can imagine Tim there in that idealized psychological loop. He's got the memory of pushing his father around. He's got the desire to change. He can imagine himself thinner. He's thinking of a structure that he can use to change his behavior. He's thinking of what resources he needs, and he's analyzing all the data from that. But there's a challenge with this, is crossing those edges, crossing those boundaries, and navigating them successfully. And this is how we feel. We feel it's precarious. We feel it's risky. We're not sure if it's going to work. We're not sure if we can actually get through that journey. So navigating the edge, there's always a gradient across an edge. There's always a gradient as we cross that boundary. We feel like we're pushing against something or something is pushing against us. And there are various gradients. It might be an authority gradient. We might feel that someone has the authority to say yes or no to us, or we might feel we need the authority to do something. It can be a status gradient. We can feel that someone has higher status than us, so they can prevent us from crossing that boundary. We can feel that we are a nobody, that nothing's really going to work for us. There can also be a belief gradient. We can believe that we're not good enough, in the classic imposter syndrome, or we can believe that we're too good in Dunning-Kruger. And there can also be inverse gradients, where we believe, we feel, we think that we're no good at something, and other people thinking you're absolutely brilliant at doing that. So working with these gradients, identifying these edges, understanding them, engaging with them and navigating them becomes really, really useful. So in summary, this sounds like a platitude, but it's really powerful to remember we work better as humans rather than as machines. So if you remember that we are all human beings with our frailties and failings, but our brilliance and amazingness, we work better that way rather than just thinking that we are a cog in some corporate machine. Our brains are organic, non-linear simulators. They're fabulous things. They can engage with ambiguity, with paradox, with complexity, and they can help us navigate that. So rather than doing it in that mechanistic, Aristotelian, logical way, by actually understanding that we're simulating the world and we can understand our perceptions of it and engage with those perceptual edges, we can really make a difference. We use our nonlinear simulations to make sense of uncertainty. That's why our brains have evolved. They're really, really good at making sense of uncertainty by continually running simulations of it. One of the challenges we have in crossing those perceptual edges is we can get stuck in our stories. So Tim had that story was that he was just a big guy, and then he decided to change that story. He changed those simulations he was running. It's an iterative process. It's based on error rather than failure. Failure tends to be pass-fail. It's binary. It either worked or it didn't. How our brains work is they work on error. How far away are you from the desired output? So if I lift this glass of water to my lips, I'm continually working on how far away it is. That's an error. That's closer. That's closer. It's the same when you're driving down the road. If you take a second to look at your hands on the steering wheel, even though it's a perfectly straight road, you're making continual tiny corrections. So you're always, when you simulate, how far away are you from something rather than have you passed or failed? And so our brains are using approximation rather than estimation. So in an estimate, you're trying to predict the value of something in the future. In an approximation, it's proximal. How close are you to the outcome you desire? So working with error is far more powerful than working with failure. It's a continual simulation rather than a periodic prediction. So rather than time boxing something and saying, I predict this will occur, this outcome will occur at this time, you're continually simulating, updating, checking those errors, evolving, making it better and better. Who we are and what we make are always works in progress. Things emerge for us, we get them into a steady state of existence, and then we're always trying to evolve them and improve them. And to be a human is to be in that continual process of becoming. We're all works in progress. We've been people, we are people, and we can use that experience and awareness, use our perceptions to become people. So I'm Ian Wallace, Ian McLaren Wallace. If you'd like to get in touch with me and chat a bit more about the human edge or psychology or why I've got this fascination with Laurel and Hardy's shifting pianos, please do. You can go to the website, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. I don't use Facebook anymore. I deleted that a few years back for reasons that are becoming obvious. Thank you very much.
Ian, thank you very much indeed. I thought that was absolutely fantastic, and I think incredibly poignant to our audience as well. I thought that was really great. Thank you very much.